Is it just me, or do these people speed down the street?
Yeah.
They could care less if there's a police station. I'm like, slow down, you're nuts.
I know, right? There should be a speed trap right here.
I,
Right here.
you know, I wish there was.
I know, because you live right.
I live right down the street, and every day I'm like,
Yeah.
I mean, I should complain about my neighbors. They're speeding down the dead-end street themselves, and I'm like,
Are they planning on putting a light at the end of that where the cop is here on South Street? That's a bad.
oh, I don't think so. I don't think that's part of the renovations.
South Street and 27 when you go out.
Hi,
Yeah.
I'm great. How are you?
They should have a light there.
Turn me up. Oh, the volume? Terrific. It's working. I was going to ask you if it was working.
Sometimes go right and then down. What's that street on the left? You go down Stone.
I was waiting to make a left on Ellis last night.
Right.
When I was going
All right.
We can get started. I know they're not going to be able to hear me, but
Exactly.
good afternoon, everybody. Today we have Mark Resnick, who I know you were just getting to know a little bit, and he's going to be here talking about his newly published book, 10 Days with Dad. I think it should be very interesting. Just a reminder that Walpole Media is here today. If you have any questions, just raise your hand, and maybe Mark can repeat the questions so we can make sure we can hear you over the microphone.
Yeah,
Thanks, Mark.
absolutely. I'm a loud talker, so welcome. This is incredible. What a great group. What a great morning. This is, I was telling Debbie earlier, this is the epitome of the fall, right? A gorgeous day. If I wasn't speaking, I'd be in shorts and a sweatshirt. That's the best time of the year. So, let me ask you a question. Can you hear me in the back okay? You can hear me. Great. Time machines. Time machines. What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear a time machine? Anybody, just shout it out.
Well, you go back,
Going back and
right?
Back in time. Time machines. What else? Anything, random. There's no right or wrong here. Time machine. Reminisce. Movies? Back to the Future? One of my favorites. Well, after today, you're going to be thinking about time machines a little bit differently. We're going to think about Alzheimer's, dementia. The two words I'm going to use them interchangeably. Basically, for today's purposes, I'll probably say dementia more often than not. I found over the last 6 months, or actually 6 years, I should say, it's been a while since my dad got sick, that's been the easiest way for me to explain dementia to people, what my dad was going through on a daily basis. 1 minute, he would be in his condo, in his kitchen, I don't know, doing whatever, cooking eggs, and the next he'd be in Las Vegas at the tables, playing blackjack or let it ride. Then boom, right back home. In his mind.
Absolutely.
Be on the couch, all of a sudden, he's back in college. Back and forth between the worlds. Fascinating. Fascinating. I found it to be incredible in the easiest way. His mind just went back and forth between his worlds like it was nothing. One day he told me about it. He said, let me tell you about the time machine. I said, time machine? Yeah, you push a button. Then you're in Quincy. All of a sudden you're in Quincy with your boys. And then boom, you get back. I said, that's incredible. Because people with dementia, depending on who your personality is, you're either going to correct them, Dad, come on, there's no such thing as a time machine, or you're going to let it go. Tell me more. And I think that's the way to go, is kind of encourage them. It's good and bad. Obviously, it's good and bad. Like any extraordinary futuristic thing, it's good and bad. And the way I look at it is, the more he used his time machine, the less powerful it became over time. And then eventually he would just stare at it and say, what is this piece of clunk doing in my house? That's how his brain went. From forgetfulness to back and forth between the worlds to, what am I doing here? So let's fast forward a little bit. Again, my name's Mark Resnick. I grew up in the South Shore in a town called Norwell, right in between Boston and the Cape. I grew up with 2 boys. I'm the middle child. I got an older and a younger brother. And my dad raised us. My mom moved out of the house when I was 7. They got divorced, pretty early, which was pretty unusual at the time. The most unusual part, though, was that my mom moved out. Don't ask me why. I have no idea. I mean, I have some inklings, but I never really got the true story of why she moved out and not my dad. Anyway, so my dad to the best of my knowledge, didn't know how to cook or do the laundry. And here he is with three boys, 5, 7, and 9 at the time, in Norwell, the small house. And he figured it out. He figured it out eventually. Over time, I'm going over years, he figured it out. It wasn't a perfect upbringing at all. You know, there was a lot. My dad wasn't a warm and fuzzy kind of guy. Like, how you doing? How's your day? Did you do your homework? No, none of that stuff. You know, I'm sure some of you can relate to that. Back in the day, it just maybe wasn't the same. Not for everybody, but for in our case, that was certainly how it was. I got my cheat sheet here so I don't go too far off script because I want to be mindful of your time. My dad was, again, I moved out of the house when I was 22 after college. So I lived with my dad for quite a while. He coached me in hockey for, gosh, number of years. And he was my business partner. For 14 years we were together. And yet, honestly, I didn't know the man. I didn't know him until he got sick. That's when I really got to know him. In 2014, my dad, had the typical signs of forgetfulness. His jokes kind of went incomplete, all that good stuff. And you really just don't think much about it. You know, he was in his 70s, and because it's not in our family, Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, just never even thought about putting the dots together that maybe there was something wrong. But there was. And it took several years before he couldn't drive or cook or take his medications. It took a while, which was great. He knew it was coming. We knew it was coming. We kind of ignored it because he seemed pretty good. We kind of made some changes, into long-term care, but not really. We really kind of blew it off for a while until he lost his license, until he couldn't take his meds, until he couldn't cook, because he used to cook for my stepmom. And we would take turns going to see him. He lived in Pembroke, so I would make the drive from Walpole to Pembroke 2 or 3 times a week. If and when I break down, because I probably will, raise your hand and ask me a question. Anything. Get me back on track. So one day, it was my turn coming down to Pembroke, and my dad, part of his Alzheimer's was, he was sort of at a hybrid Alzheimer's, Lewy body dementia. So he had some hallucinations. Now, my dad's hallucinations weren't hurtful. He wasn't violent. He wasn't physical, but he would see creatures in his house. He would see little people. He'd look out and, oh, that's weird. What is that person doing there? Or there'd be something, he'd be on his couch and on his treadmill, he'd see a creature. Sometimes they were scary, missing limbs, and it was frightening. We didn't know what to call these creatures, so we called them demons. I don't know why. We just did. We called them demons. Dad, how are the demons today? Well, when I showed up that one day in March, the demons had just gotten the best of him. He was just a mess. He didn't even recognize me for a minute. Dad, you okay? Oh, Marcus, I'm so glad you're here. And I picked him up. I packed him up and I said, let's go, we're out. You're out of here. The demons were visible only in his condo, which was weird, I guess. So we picked him up. I did. No plan. I was supposed to take him out to breakfast at the omelet factory. I wasn't taking him home with me. And I took him home with me so we can get him into an assisted living place because he could no longer live at his home. It was too much. They were taking over his life, and they were taking over our lives too, because he'd be calling us at 5 a.m. The demons are everywhere. What do I do? Okay, so like any middle child does, you pick him up and you take him home with you with no plan. And for 10 days, he spent the next 10 days with me. And that's when I really started to get to know him. Now, I was a writer growing up. I say I was a writer. I was a journaler. Because my parents were divorced and I didn't have that normal relationship with my mom. She wasn't somebody I could share anything with, and neither was my dad, and neither were my brothers. So I journaled a lot. So when my dad got sick, I started journaling. But after those 10 days with me, I started thinking, oh my gosh, there's a bigger story here. Not because I wanted to share it, but just because I felt obligated to share it. I felt like people needed to know what it was like. So I'm gonna I want to make sure my agenda for today is to tell you a little bit about the book, tell you a little bit about Alzheimer's and what my experience was, because they're very different. The first front row, you could have all different experiences with your family. There's sometimes physical, there's sometimes anger, there's sometimes resentment, there's sometimes, they live to be 100 and they just don't remember anything. That wasn't the case with us. So I want to tell you a little bit about Alzheimer's, and I want to tell you a little bit about caregiving, because that's really what this is all about. in my experience, is a little bit unique because I'm a guy. And usually, quite frankly, the caregivers aren't men. Usually they're women. And usually they're not, they're usually older. So my dad spent 10 days with us. It was fascinating. It was so incredible, from the time machine to, he'd see something on my neighbor's lawn, and my neighbor had some fake flamingos in the front yard, and he goes, "Oh, that's so cool. What's cool, Dad? Your neighbor's got flamingos in their front yard." I was like, "Yeah, that is awesome." And I just went along with it. And for 10 days, he dropped something on the ground at dinner time, and he'd go to pick. I said, "Dad, don't worry about it. The dog will get it." And we didn't have a dog. He's like, "Oh, okay." And then 5 minutes later, I see him, like any good grandparent would be doing. He's like, nobody's looking, putting their food on. "Dad, what are you doing?" He's like, "I'm feeding the dog." I was like, "I was just kidding." Because caregivers, it's really difficult. It's the greatest burden you'll ever experience in your life, and it's the greatest blessing. So we needed humor to break things up. I did, because it was minute to minute sometimes. After 10 days, we finally found an assisted living home from right down the street in Sharon. It's called the Whitney Place. Sort of brand new. It was 2 or 3 years old at the time, but it didn't smell like a nursing home. It was assisted living with a memory care and independent living, memory assisted independent. So it was all three. So this is great. He can socialize with everyone, not just, because at the time he went in, he was pretty mild. He knew who I was. He knew who everyone was. He knew what he did for a living. He's pretty good. So he spent 10 months at Whitney, and I saw him every day, twice a day. I gradually went down to 1, and I took Sundays off, except to fill his meds. So I spent, we shared about 600 cups of coffee, a couple hundred meals together, and I really got to know him for the first time in my life. I got to see his compassion and his humor and his generosity and his, just stuff I knew. I mean, he was always a kind, generous man, but I didn't really get to see him. I didn't really know my dad until he got sick. And so I regretted the fact that I waited so long to get to know him. And that's one of the messages of the book is, we shouldn't be waiting for tragedy, a life-altering experience, to get to know the people in our lives. We shouldn't be waiting for a life-altering disease to let go of our regret, to forgive people, to move on. That's a big part of the book. And I wish I had realized that much sooner. Which is why I say caregiving is the greatest burden and the greatest blessing in your life. So he had the typical ups and downs of assisted living. And if anyone has any questions about that, we can talk about it. To me, this is the best way to describe assisted living. Not independent living, assisted, where you have some help. They can't take your temperature because they're not a nursing home. They have nurses on staff, but they can't even take your temperature. But they'll assist you. They'll get you in the shower if you need it. They'll get you to and from dinner. I find the ones we looked at, and we looked at a half a dozen. The marketing people are great. They're shiny buildings, right? Yeah. And you peel back the onion a little bit, and you're like, oh man, it is what it is. I'm not blaming Whitney or anyone else. It's really hard to find care. It's really hard to find people to work at these places. And a lot of the people who work at these places are immigrants, which there's nothing wrong with. But sometimes there's a language barrier. There's a communication barrier sometimes. So after 10 months, it was ups and downs. He had a couple falls. You fall in an assisted living, you get sent right to the hospital. If you have dementia or Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, going to the hospital is one of the worst things you can ever do. They take scans, they see some blood in the brain. It could have been an old fall, it could have been a new one. They jack up the medications for the wrong reasons, even though they know it says right there on the ticket, Alzheimer's, dementia. Every time they come out of a hospital, they're banged up. They just, the thing about Alzheimer's and dementia is they want comfort, they want stability. And you put somebody in a hospital for a night or two, and it's awful, awful. That happened a few times. My dad had colon cancer. We didn't know it. We didn't know he was sick. He complained about certain pains, but when you have dementia, I think the nerve blockers in the brain don't give signals the same way we do. He still had pain. He just couldn't communicate it. He couldn't tell us he was in pain. Or if he did, he'd say, "Oh yeah, my back, it's really bothering me." Well, God, that was probably pretty bad. He was in pain for quite a while. We just didn't know it. The way we found out that he had colon cancer is because towards the end of his stay at assisted living, he was so off his game. He was just almost discombobulated. He couldn't feed himself. He couldn't get out of a chair. He fell. His energy was so low. We had no idea. We just thought things were getting worse. So when you go and you get your blood taken, and there's certain kind of counts, I'm not a doctor, but his blood level, whatever the reading should have been, it should have been an 11. Average 11, 12, 13. He was a 5, which was like bad. So when that night we went to the hospital, he had blood transfusions all night long. They couldn't stick his arm. They couldn't find a needle. They couldn't get the blood drawn because it was so dried up. They couldn't believe it. The doctors, the nurses, everyone was like, "Oh my God, 5?" Did some tests. Boom, colon cancer. Now at that age, it was too late to treat. He would never have survived the anesthesia for Alzheimer's. We didn't treat it. He moved from assisted living to a nursing home in Plymouth called Newfield House. I couldn't recommend them highly enough. It's on the top of a hill in Plymouth. You know them.
I'm born and raised in Plymouth. The best.
Oh my God.
Private, though.
Private. Important distinction. Expensive as hell. No insurance. 100% out of your pocket. My dad, we used every single penny of his savings, and he died a month before we were going to run out of money. He knew. Greatest place. The care is phenomenal. The people are phenomenal. They've been there for years. They're loyal. I couldn't say enough great things about it. I could go on and on about the Newfield House. So if you're ever in a need for a nursing home, to the point where I was like, we should have had him in a nursing home sooner. That's how well he did. When he left assisted living, he was in a hospital for 7 days. Honest to God, I think he had COVID. It was right before COVID hit. It was a month before COVID. He slept for 7 straight days. We thought he was going to die. We all said goodbye. I didn't, but my brothers did. I'm a middle child. I was kind of hopeful. He slept for 7 straight days. When the ambulance took him to this our nursing home, he was pretty much in a coma. I stayed for a few hours, never woke up. The next morning, he was, obviously, 7 days, whatever he had ran its course. But literally the next day, they had him up and feeding himself. Yeah, part coincidence, probably had nothing to do with the staff. It was probably just ran its course. But from then on, he was like a new man. And I said, oh man, I wish should we have had him here earlier? And the decisions that you're making with caregiving is, should I take him home? Should I go to assisted living? Should I go to assisted living with a memory care? Should I go to a nursing home? Those are the decisions you torture yourself with over and over again. There's no right or wrong answer. I wish we could have taken him into our house. I don't regret the assisted living, but at the same time, I probably, in hindsight, if you ask me, I'd probably bring in private care until he had to go to a nursing home. That's probably what I would do in hindsight. Either way, it's expensive. Either way, it's awful. The system stinks, and there's nothing we can do about it right now. In 10 years, we're in trouble. We're in trouble. There's a crisis going on with Alzheimer's and dementia, and there's not enough rooms and beds and care and money. Who can afford it? I don't know what the Newfield House cost, but it was $10,000, $12,000 a month. It was insane. The assisted living was $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 a month. Insane. Who can afford that forever? We have a problem coming up. Anyways, my dad spent 18 months in the nursing home through COVID. Never got it there. COVID was a real kick in the gut. Obviously, I'm stating the obvious. But until he went, I saw him every day. I was the last one he remembered until COVID. We couldn't see him for 3 months. And then by the time it was over and we could see him, he'd be there in a mask and I'd be here in a mask, 8 feet, 6 feet. I couldn't hear him. He probably couldn't hear me. And there was glimpses of recognition. But after months and months, right before Christmas, it was over. I can't tell you the story because I'll start crying. So he died. Colon cancer / Alzheimer's. Huge blessing, I think. I think the colon cancer was really what did it, because it had been, the doctor said you probably have about 2 years, and it was about 2 years. And again, it was when somebody's sick, when somebody's terminal, you pray every single day that God takes them in their sleep. Every single day. I did. So that's my experience. The book is called 10 Days with Dad. How I found purpose, passion, and peace during the darkest days of Alzheimer's and COVID. Because honest to God, it was the darkest days of my life. But I was never happier. I found a way. Once my dad's clock started, we're all terminal. As soon as you're born, you're terminal, right? We're all going to die. But when they tell you you're going to die, man, does your life change. Do your priorities change? Not for my dad, for us. I wouldn't even say my 2 brothers responded this way. I was like, man, my clock is on. I'm changing my life. I need better work-life balance. I need to, you're good, no spills. You know, I just need to take advantage of my time here. I joined a life coaching program. I obviously wrote a book through the program. They said, you know, you need to do something, you should try something life-changing. What's really gonna stretch your boundaries? And I said, I'm gonna write this book. Boom, wrote the book. I started meditating. We talked about meditation earlier. I started exercising. I started eating better. I started doing all these things. I started baking again. I love baking. I became a bread baker. And, you know, all my passions resurfaced. I don't know how. I don't know why. It just happened. It was awesome. I was happy, even though I was sad. I mean, it was crazy dichotomy. And I finally, after all this time in my life, I was able to let go of stupid things, regret, people who had harmed me, or I thought they did, but they really didn't. And questions? Need a question? Need a question? No, those 10 days was just me and my wife and my kids. Yep. Again, he was pretty mild. He was in the mild stage. So our biggest fear was him falling down the stairs at night. They were 14, 16, and 18 maybe. Oh yeah. Everybody knew what was going on with Papa.
Where did you have your life coach?
That was 2017.
Where did
Oh, it was like an online community.
you?
It's called Build Your Life Resume.
Right. Yeah, I've seen that one.
Yeah.
Great,
I had heard this gentleman speak at a conference, and I was like, I like his message.
great.
I didn't join his group, but when I was driving to see my dad one day, no kidding, no lie, I'm driving to see my dad in Pembroke, and on a podcast, I used to listen to podcasts, and here's this guy, Jesse Itzler, on the podcast talking about this program. I said, that's a sign. Signed up right away. I have ADHD, so, you know, that was like no-brainer for me.
How, you've spoken about your dad and your relationship and so forth. But how did you or your family see this starting? What triggered
Yeah.
this that said we've either got to look closer or something's going on, or
Mm-hmm.
because
Yep.
in family experiences, part of the problem is you never see this coming, and it gets deep into the situation.
Yeah.
And you're shocked that it's here. And why didn't I see this? What triggers didn't I see? So how, in your case, how did it?
It's actually not that complicated of an answer, because my dad lived in his condo in Pembroke with my stepmom, and we had our own lives with our own kids, and we would see him at holidays and, you know, hockey games. But when you're not seeing somebody every single day, it's almost impossible to notice the change, because they're so good at hiding it. It's like the dog going to the vet when he's sick. They just perk up, and you're like, oh, come on, are you kidding me? They just know. He knew when to turn it on. So in 2014, my younger brother, John, was the last of our family to get married. We all got together in Nantucket. It was a beautiful day, beautiful wedding. He had known a month before that he had early onset Alzheimer's. Didn't tell anyone. And I wrote in the book, I thought he was off. He was quieter than usual. He wasn't his usual social self. But to answer your question, we didn't know. You go out to restaurants and he says, oh, what looks good? He always said, what looks good? What are you going to get? I'm going to get that too. Those are the cues. Right. When they can't even pick off the menu because there's too many choices, that's a big cue. When they get lost going to the places that they go to every single day, whether it's the Dunkin' Donuts or something else, that's a big cue. In my dad's case, he was driving to my brother's house in Duxbury, which is one town over, couldn't find his way, had a pullover, flagged over a policeman. They took him to the hospital. He lost his license, which was the right thing to do. That was a big sign. But there are little signs. They're getting lost. My dad went to a hockey game. I coached, so I wasn't able to sit with him. My son was number 21 his whole life because of Mike Ruzioni and the Olympic team. After the game, my dad says, I wasn't sure which one Sean was. I wasn't sure who was Sean. That was a sign. I still blew that one off. I was like, oh, okay. He's been 21 for 6 years in a row. You just don't pick up the signs, except for the big ones when he got lost and had to go to the hospital. So that was a good question. Any other questions?
Is there a difference between generations? How the generations were brought up, what they did, how they did as a society in the communities? Plotting this, because years ago, in a town like this, it was an industrial town.
Yep.
Families were multi-level. How to get cars, TV,
Mm-hmm.
World War II. So has it changed dramatically? Was it then, but because society has changed?
Unscientifically, I would say absolutely. And the biggest thing is loneliness. Like you said, you had family close by. We always had family close by growing up. And so even if they were suffering, they could hide it or whatever. And again, you're with them every day. You just didn't see the signs as much. Loneliness is the #1 factor in people's decline in health. I'm not a doctor, but this is documented. And my dad was alone a lot. Even though he lived with his my stepmom, she had a different schedule. She was a night owl. So she would stay up late and get up at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And my dad was a morning person. My dad was pretty much alone from 8 in the morning till 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's a lot of alone time. Loneliness, not being close as a family. Kids are all over the place now. And kids are overscheduled, so you don't spend the quality time. Even if your father or mother go to a game, you don't have time to talk to them. You're off to the next activity. So that's the generational thing. We're overscheduled. Our seniors are lonely. Those are just facts that we have to deal with. Thank God you have places like this. This is incredible. We need more of them. So yeah, I think that's, and also, it was more like, well, he's getting old, she's getting old. It was more acceptable of like, well, it's just old age.
Exactly.
That's not really how it's supposed to be, according to the doctors. We're not supposed to say, you've got Alzheimer's or dementia, don't worry, it's part of aging. It's not.
No.
It's not supposed to be part of your normal aging. Now, it is a lot with women because they live longer, and eventually, the longer you live, the more likely you're susceptible you are to it. But now it's incredible. Gut health, exercise, sleep. Now we know for sure those 3 things, and probably in that order. Exercise, no, actually sleep probably. I'm not sure which order it is, but it's these 3. It's sleep, exercise, and diet.
I would throw in there respect for
That's just gravy, icing on the cake, absolutely. The problem is, before I answer your question, is this disease is starting 20 years before you have it. It's too late. So I need to be exercising 20 minutes a day. Do I? No. How dumb am I? They tell you you have a 50% less chance of getting Alzheimer's if you exercise for 20 minutes a day. Do I? I try to, but not every day. Question?
I have a couple of things. The latest thing now is an exercise and move.
Yeah.
We're sitting too long now. Even though you exercise 3 times a
Yep.
week, not good enough. You got to get up every hour and walk around for at least 10 minutes. That's the new thing.
That's genius.
My other question I have for you was your dad hard of hearing, because the other studies I've read about is that when they lose the hearing, it's more susceptible to dementia.
No, he wasn't.
They have a lot of theories out. Yeah.
I think older people in general, you think they have a hard time hearing, but it's only situational.
Right.
It might be in a loud room with echoes, but
Sure.
my dad did not have a hearing problem. The interesting thing about my dad was if you and I were having a conversation, and across the room somebody who said, "Hey, Ruthie, you want some more coffee?" My dad would go, "Oh no, I'm good." Right? He could hear things across the room; they just weren't related to him. So, but that is so true. I would add standing still into that lack of exercise.
Yeah, that's a new thing.
Yeah.
Now.
You know what the scariest thing? If you like to read after you finish my book, which I have in the back,
Oh, I know.
Sanjay Gupta, the guy, his book Keeping Sharp, I highly recommend it. I actually listened to it. It's hard reading because it's, but in addition to eating, sleeping, exercise, infections. Infections can go to the brain. Wait, he says floss every day. Infections from not flossing, the plaque buildup infection could have an impact on your brain. What we put in our stomachs could have an infection, could have an impact on our brain. Cavities.
They're contagious.
So yeah, but the answer, it's prevention, right? It's really about prevention. They spend so much money on curing. It's too late. The cure is prevention. So far, that seems to be what they're now realizing, is that when people are 30, 40, well, 20, 30, and 40, how do we get them to sleep better, eat better, and exercise? So I found my purpose and my passion and my peace just because I didn't have I was one of the few. I think if you're a caregiver, you're either changing your life forever or you're just getting through that little period and you're going back to your old self. And I'm never going back to my old self. It was such a wake-up call. And you know, that's what I try to tell people. It's never too late or early to start your passions. This book wasn't written for people like you, although it's extremely relevant to you. It was written for people who are 20 and 15, because they're the people who need to sleep, eat, and exercise right now. They're the people who need to pursue their passion right now. How many of us in this room, don't raise your hand, spent an entire career unhappy because we ignored our passions for whatever reason? If you can pursue your passion as a young person, it's going to stink in the beginning. You may not make the money that you thought you were going to make, but in the end, you are going to be happier. And happiness, to me, is the number one way to beat Alzheimer's. Anti-loneliness, happiness. That's just my opinion. It's not a fact. It's my opinion.
That's true.
Questions?
Question for you, why did you decide to put him in assisted living, continue caregiving? I mean, caregiving for 10 days, how wonderful.
I couldn't do it.
You couldn't do
right.
it. Alone, with family?
With the family, the house wasn't set up. I did work from home.
You get exhausted.
We just knew we couldn't, realistically, we couldn't do it. Now, had I known what I known, I would have. I would have done that.
Our situation, my dad was in assisted living for 7 years.
Yeah.
With my mother, ran out of money, now he's with us. 100 and a half.
100 and a half?
World War II vet, yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
Is he still, like, with it?
Totally. His vitals, 100% oxygen, blood pressure better than anything. Talk about
Oh,
teeth.
okay, so,
Lose his teeth, never missed a dentist appointment, but won't have them removed.
okay, so listen, here's the deal.
Yeah.
You need to get him to write, you need to record him. You need to get those stories, that oral tradition down for your kids and grandkids.
Out of the woodwork to interview him.
Great.
World War II.
That's amazing.
That's
Yeah.
nice.
Because I don't know anything about my dad.
A lot on the shoulder.
I feel for you. It's the greatest burden and blessing in the history of mankind. It is such a burden. I'm sorry. I am so sorry. There's no harder job in the world. I mean, raising kids is hard, but there's no harder job in the world than
Makes you a better person.
flipping. I'd like to think so, but it really depends on the person. Depends on the caregiver.
Right.
Not to get too selfish, but so I like to write. I'm writing my book. I'm obviously selling them in the back. I totally forgot to bring cash. I always have cash with me, so if you don't get a chance to buy the book, I'll work it out with the front desk. I don't have any change. The point is, though, is that writing again has been, Norm and I were in the same industry. We're in the sales industry. And I would, in a heartbeat, stop my selling and write full time if I could.
Therapeutic.
It's not just therapeutic. I love it.
Fun, yeah.
I just want to, that's what I want my career to be. So I wasn't planning on writing another book because you have to promote this book for a year, blah, blah, blah. And then two guys approached me who had similar experiences on caregiving. They said, we want to write a book about caregiving. I said, that's a great idea. So now I'm in the throes of writing another book about not just Alzheimer's, about cancer, dyslexia, all sorts of people who are caregivers, because it's the greatest blessing, greatest burden in the world. And we need other caregivers to know that you're not alone. Because we don't want to ask for help. Hopefully you're asking for help. But it's so hard, and people don't know how to help. They think, running an errand is a good thing, but it's just so hard. I would say the most important thing, if you have somebody who's caregiving for somebody else, is just pick up the phone or send them a text every other day, once a week. That's the most meaningful to me. Just because that shows that they care. They can't be there. They can't do, maybe they can't help out financially. But just knowing that people are there and caring and thinking about you is huge. You agree with that? It just doesn't happen enough. because we get so busy in our lives. No blame. It's just life. Yeah. Yeah. So my messages are, look, never too late to pursue your passion. None of us in this room, including yourselves, are obligated to be the person you were when you were a child, when you were a mom or dad or a career salesman or whatever you were. We're not obligated to be that person we were all those years ago. We're not obligated to be the person we were a year ago, a month ago. We can change who we are in our stories right now if we wanted to. If you want to. That's the ultimate takeaway from the book. It's two. It's pursue your passion and become the person you want to become without waiting for a life-altering event to force you to change your way. It's been an absolute pleasure. I will answer questions all day long. This is a banged-out, sold-out crowd. I love it. I love sharing the message. I hope you'll buy the book at some point. If you don't do it today, it's on Amazon. I'll make sure copies are here, and you can just work it out with them. I will sign them right now after this meeting, for sure. Are there any other questions? I mean, honestly, I could talk about this for hours. It's so dear to me. I love it.
I think the sad thing is when I'm a retired RN.
Yeah.
When you talking, they know everything, and that brain is not firing correctly.
Yeah.
And they can't, like your father, can't express it.
They can't get the words out.
That is
Yep.
hot stabbing. Yeah. For them,
Yeah.
for them.
It's heart stabbing for the people who don't see that person every day.
Right.
Because when they come, seeing him every day, I could almost translate everything he said.
Right.
Yeah, it wasn't that bad, but whatever he said, I knew exactly what he was talking about. But if my brothers would come, they'd go, "Oh my God, Dad is terrible." I was like, "Wow, he's having a great day. What are you talking about?"
Right.
So you're right. If you don't see the person, you just go, "Oh my God, this is awful." It sometimes isn't as awful as you think. It's just they can't get it from here to here. Yeah. Yeah. It's true. It's a terrible disease.
Do you think that medications are helpful? I have
No,
my own opinion.
not
I
yet.
don't think they work
No.
either, but that's my own opinion.
No, so it's like it's Alzheimer's. It's basically like cholesterol. It clogs your brain. So the plaques on your brain are just slowly but surely blocking out sensors in your brain so that you can't communicate to different parts of your body and to your speech. Like I said, because it takes so long, I don't think I'm not sure if there'll ever be a drug that will block up the blockers like cholesterol does. Probably will. But I think there will be drugs in my lifetime that will prolong the plaque. It can't stop the plaques from going, but I think it can kind of hold them steady for a little bit. It'll prolong the illness, but I think we'll have a cure at some point. I think we will. Maybe I'm just naive, but I think we will. I mainly think that because in the next 10 years, like I said, we're in trouble. It's on the forefront of people's minds now. But like cancer was 40 years ago, where it was like you knew somebody and somebody, but it wasn't always in your family. Now cancer is in every single one of our families. And now Alzheimer's is the same way. Oh, I had an uncle who went through that. And now it's my parents. It's so close now, that one-to-one connection. And I think as more people have this experience, it's going to wake people up because there's not enough facilities, not enough money, there's not enough research, not enough funding. So that's my hope. My hope. So. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'll be in the back if you want to grab a book.